that, which is a lumbar compensation that allows him to descend very comfortably, in fact, into a deep squat, but probably not the strategy that we would be looking for. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand, and it is perfect. All right. We got to get rolling, so let's dig straight into today's Q&A. I had a couple questions that came in through email. Very similar, but actually kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. One question was, why do some of my clients squats look like deadlifts? And the other was like, why do some of my clients' deadlifts look like squats? And a lot of times I think what we're just looking at is a purely structural bias. And so we can actually go to our foundational archetypes under these situations. And so if we look at the two archetypes, and keep in mind, plastic model, not reality, but close enough for rock and roll. So if we looked at our narrow ISA bias, we're going to have this inhale representation in the axial skeleton. So from a pelvic perspective, we're going to see that narrowing of the infrapubic angle. We see counter nutation here, and this is somebody that has a pelvic outlet that can descend. And so this would be somebody that would bias towards a deeper squatting capability just by physical structure. That eccentric orientation allows them to descend straight down between their feet and keep their center of gravity over their feet. Whereas if I had somebody that was biased towards an exhaled strategy, which would be anomalous that are IR, I have a nutated sacrum under these circumstances, and I have a concentric orientation of that pelvic outlet. This is somebody that's going to have trouble descending into that space, but because the expansion is more posterior, they're going to be those people that are going to be better deadlifters. So if we would refer to that as a hinging motion, you would see a better hinger under those circumstances. So just by pure structural bias, you're going to see these deviations where your narrow ISAs are going to tend to be better squatters. They're not going to be great kettlebell swingers. They're not going to be great deadlifters. Whereas with your wide ISAs, much better deadlifters. They're going to be like your squat to parallel kind of a guy that might be very, very capable when it comes to heavier loads because they have a much higher internal pressure capability, and they have that concentric orientation of the pelvic diaphragm that's going to allow them to lift more weight. So again, we're looking at some structural biases. What about those situations where you say, well, but Bill, I have a wide ISA and he could squat really, really deep? So in many of those cases, all they need to do is create some form of compensatory strategy that produces enough external rotation to allow them to descend. And so what you might see is compensations through the extremities. So I have a wider stance, I'll toe out to create that ER space to allow me to descend, and that can produce the internal rotation at the bottom of the squat. So you'll see that in a lot of accomplished Olympic lifters, or you might see a compensatory strategy that looks like that, which is a lumbar compensation that allows him to descend very comfortably, in fact, into a deep squat, but probably not the strategy that we would be looking for. On the other end of the spectrum, if I'm a narrow ISA that should be capable of deep squatting based on pure structure, if I superimpose enough superficial strategies on top of that axial skeleton, I'm going to create a higher pressure situation that will prevent me from accessing external rotation that I'm going to need to descend into the squat. So it will look something like that, where you will see them sort of hit that hard stop just above parallel where they can no longer descend the pelvic diaphragm. They can no longer expand A to P that they would need to get into the deep squat. So I'm going to cut to a couple of clips that we did recently on actually the Coffee and Coaches Conference calls, where we talked a little bit about this concept in regards to the more vertical helical angles that we'll see on narrow ISAs and why they might be more capable, or why we might see somebody that would be biased towards being a more effective deadlifter than a squatter. So those clips will come in handy for you. If you would like to participate in a 15-minute consultation, please go to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com, and we will arrange that at our mutual convenience. Everybody have an outstanding Tuesday. I'll see you tomorrow.
If they were of a more flat representation, how would that look in the hip hinge?
It'd be a lousy hip hinge because they wouldn't have any space to orient the pelvis forward, because like in a true deadlift, pull from the floor, you're going to create an orientation of the pelvis, right? So I'm using a middle propulsive representation of the pelvis in an ideal circumstance because it's going to be a high pressure propulsive type of an action, right? And so if I have somebody that is on a flatter turn because their helical angle is more vertical, so a narrow or ISA, they're just not very good hingers because they don't have the ability to create the eccentric orientation that's coming off of the apex of the sacrum. Because I need that space. I need a nutated sacrum to do a great hinge, right? To do a deadlift or whatever it might be. Right? Anything that's in a true middle propulsive representation, that's the IR representation. But if I have a bias towards ER, I'm not very good at hinging. Right?
True.
So these are the people that struggle with things like kettlebell swings, deadlifts, RDLs, single leg stuff, where that's very middle propulsive. Right?
Got it.
And so then your goal there is if that's the goal is to try to capture that, then they might not be changeable enough to be great at it. So be careful with your selection, right?
Yes.
Okay. But yeah, you just got to get them. You got to get them the IR representation to the best of their ability, and then hopefully they can improve. Some people are very adaptable and they can go through all. They can go early, middle, late, and then. Again, some people are just going to be biased in one direction or the other. So your wides will not be the best squatters. Your narrows will not be the best deadlifters.
Got it. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's why it's useful to have a larger repertoire of activities where, one person will be great at a barbell deadlift. Another person will be terrible at a barbell deadlift, but then you you give them a trap bar and it starts to look a whole lot better because it's a little bit more squatty than deadlifty, right?
Yep.
There you go. As I descend farther into the squat, I'm going to go through a space where I have to increase the amount of internal rotation bias. So the pelvis actually changes shape to get through that middle range. Okay, so it moves towards what would look like an exhaled position of the pelvis. So the inhaled position of the pelvis is at the top. That's an external rotation bias. As I go through the middle range, I have to capture an an exhale bias, which is internal rotation. So the pelvis changes shape and the femur could maintain its position, but the overall representation of the pelvis and the femur at that point in time is internal rotation. As I descend farther, I have to re-expand and I have to go back towards my external rotation bias at the bottom of a squat. Okay. Now, how many times you ever seen a perfect squat? Almost never, right? Because most people can't assume the ideal shape to pass through those ranges and capture the full position because they don't have full adaptability. And a lot of that's just based on structure. So now we can go all the way back to what's your bias? Are you a wide ISA guy or a narrow ISA guy? Right? That would bias you towards one end of the spectrum. So if I'm a narrow, I'm really good at the top and the bottom of the squat. If I'm a wide, I'm really good in that middle part of the squat, generally speaking. Okay.
Bill, can I ask a question on that?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I was on a roll, dude. You interrupted my train. No, go ahead. Of course you can.
Is this why if you watch, I watch a lot of powerlifters squat just repetitively over time, and once you see they hit certain areas, they either have like a hip hinge or something goes wonky.
Yeah. They're out of room.
Shape.
They're out of room. Right. Mm-hmm. So here you go. So let's just say that you can't expand posteriorly. Okay. Knowing full well that to initiate the squat and move through an external rotation bias, or to hit the bottom of a squat, which is an external rotation bias, and I can't do that. So I'm initiating the squat more towards my internal rotation bias, right? And so it's going to look, for lack of a better explanation, hingy. It's going to look more like my deadlift than it is my Olympic weightlifter is sitting down at the bottom of his squat, right? Because that, and again, it could be physical structure. It could be the training strategies that you've been using that don't allow a shape change to occur
that allows you to access that motion. So again, you can diagnose. I've been doing this a lot lately. I got to stop that. So you can diagnose a squat or what people can and can't do, you know, based on the on that shape as they move through the squat. So when I see somebody that's got this really, really hingy squat, they've got what would be termed a really strong lordosis as they're trying to squat. That's a pelvis that is compressed on the backside and anteriorly oriented. Very, very useful for producing force, very useful for stopping motion from occurring. So again, let's use Joseph's powerlifter as an example. So as they try to squat, they don't want to squat too deep, right? They want to stop the motion at a very specific point where they just get far enough down towards the ground where they get a pass from the judge. I did it again. Somebody slapped my wrist. Where they pass their lift, right? So they get their white lights so they can say, oh, it was a good squat or it was not a good squat, right? And so then that becomes useful under those circumstances, but it doesn't make it better than something else. It just means that it is a variation. So when you see someone's knees deviate, when they put, one second. When you see someone's knees deviate early in a squat, and people say you're externally rotating, what they're doing is they're moving their knees apart because at that point in time, the shape of their body does not allow them to access external rotation straight ahead because it's out here. External rotation is out there. That's where they find it based on their physical structure or based on the context of the lift or the performance of the movement. That's why external rotation is a space that is around you based on the shape of your body.